Hey everyone, and welcome back to Little Monsters Comic Pop Deep Dive. I'm Justin Jake, and I am so psyched to jump into another classic Batman issue with all of you today.
Hi everyone, Mary Dunst here. I am thrilled to be joining Justin for this deep dive. We're looking at a real gem from the Silver Age, Batman issue #139 from April 1961. This issue is amazing. Not only does it introduce a fan-favorite character, but it also really dives into some fascinating themes about inspiration and legacy in the world of crime fighting.
That's right, Mary. We have got a lot to unpack today,
Yeah.
from a villain reinventing himself to a thrilling island escape, and of course, the debut of a character who would go on to become a legend in her own right.
Before we get to that exciting debut, though, let's talk about Signalman. He has decided to ditch his old look and become the Blue Bowman. It's fascinating because his whole rebranding is actually inspired by another villain, Green Arrow's nemesis Bullseye. He even adopts Bullseye's signature trick arrows.
It's like a twisted version of Keeping Up with the Joneses, right? Even villains have their idols and inspirations. But this raises a really interesting question. What does it say about the nature of villainy when one bad guy is inspired by another?
Right. It challenges the simple idea of good versus evil and suggests that even criminal behavior can be influenced by trends and external factors. It makes you think about how ideas, even dangerous ones, can spread and evolve. It's not just about individual choices, it's about the broader context that shapes those choices.
And you see that play out in the way Batman responds to this new challenge. He doesn't just rely on brute force. He adapts his own tactics and counters Blue Bowman's trick arrows with, wait for it, trick batarangs.
Exactly. It highlights how adaptable and resourceful Batman is. He's always one step ahead,
Yeah.
thinking about his opponent's strategy and coming up with innovative solutions. This isn't just about who's stronger, it's about who's smarter.
Absolutely. And that theme of ingenuity continues in the second story, The Island of 1,000 Traps, where Batman and Robin face off against a villain named George Milo, who has a real knack for, well, traps.
And these aren't your average traps either. They're incredibly elaborate and deadly, showcasing a level of creativity and strategic thinking that rivals even Batman's, for instance. There's one scene where Batman and Robin are trapped in a room with a giant robot crossbow aimed directly at them.
It's moments like these that really make you appreciate how quick-thinking Batman and Robin have to be. They have to constantly assess their surroundings, anticipate their opponent's moves, and come up with solutions on the fly. What would you do, Mary, if you were in their shoes?
Honestly, I'd probably panic. But Batman and Robin stay remarkably calm under pressure. They use their knowledge of physics and engineering to outsmart the traps. Like when they trick the crossbow into firing at the castle doors instead of them. It's a fantastic example of how they used their intellect to turn a seemingly impossible situation to their advantage.
Totally. Now, before we move on to the main event of this issue, let's touch on who this George Milo guy is. He's not as well known as some of Batman's other rogues, but he plays a significant role in this story. He's this brilliant but twisted criminal mastermind who thrives on creating elaborate death traps.
That's right. And his character further underscores this issue's focus on ingenuity and how it can be used for both good and evil. You see this duality reflected in both the heroes and the villains.
Okay, so now for the moment we've all been waiting for. The debut of Batgirl. It's in this very issue that Betty Kane, the niece of Batwoman, makes her first appearance. And let me tell you, it's a pretty memorable one.
It really is. Betty deduces her aunt's secret identity and, inspired by Batwoman's crime fighting, creates her own Batgirl persona. This sets up a fascinating dynamic between them.
On the one hand, you have Batwoman who's obviously impressed and flattered by her niece's admiration. But on the other hand, she's terrified of the dangers Betty will face in the crime-fighting world.
The source material even has Batwoman saying, although Batwoman is impressed and flattered, she begs her niece not to become Batgirl again. There's this conflict between wanting to protect her niece and recognizing her niece's agency and desire to help.
And to complicate matters further, Batman and Robin actually suggest that Batwoman discourage Betty by putting her through rigorous training, hoping she'll lose interest.
Talk about mixed messages, right? But it really highlights the complexity of mentorship, especially when it comes to something as dangerous as crime fighting. What do you think, Justin? What's the right approach in a situation like this? Is it better to protect someone from harm or to guide them and help them prepare for the challenges ahead?
That's a tough one. I think it depends on the individual and the situation. But in Batgirl's case, she proves that she's more than capable of handling herself. She uses her sharp intellect and resourcefulness to play a pivotal role in capturing the Cobra Gang, a group of criminals who've been terrorizing Gotham.
Absolutely. And this brings us to another important point about this issue. The significance of the Cobra Gang. They might not be Batman's most iconic foes, but they represent a real threat, and Batgirl's role in their capture solidifies her position as a capable crime fighter. It's not just about playing dress-up. She's using her skills and her courage to make a real difference.
That's a great point, Mary. It's not just about following in someone's footsteps. It's about forging your own path. But you know what? We're just getting started. There's so much more to discuss about Batgirl's debut, the themes of legacy and mentorship, and the overall significance of this issue. So make sure you stick around for part 2 of our deep dive into Batman issue #139.
Welcome back to Little Monsters Comic Pop Deep Dive. We're in the middle of unpacking Batman issue #139, an issue that's packed with action, intrigue, and some really thought-provoking themes.
It is amazing how this one issue manages to touch on so many different ideas, from the evolution of villainy to the complexities of mentorship and the emergence of a new generation of heroes.
And one of the themes that keeps coming up is this idea of ingenuity. We see it in the villain's elaborate schemes, like Blue Bowman's trick arrows and George Milo's intricate death traps, but we also see it in the way Batman and his allies respond to these challenges. They're constantly having to think on their feet, adapt to new situations, and come up with creative solutions.
Yeah, it's not just about punching your way out of every problem. These characters have to use their brains as much as their brawn. Remember that scene on Milo's Island, where they're surrounded by those pressure-sensitive floor tiles, and one wrong step could trigger a deadly trap.
Oh, absolutely. It was like a giant game of hopscotch with life or death stakes. But instead of panicking, Batman uses his detective skills to analyze the pattern of the tiles and figure out a safe path. He even uses his cape to distribute his weight and avoid triggering the traps.
It's such a clever moment. And it really shows how Batman's ingenuity goes beyond just gadgets and fighting skills. He's a master strategist and problem solver.
Exactly. And it's not just Batman. We see that same resourcefulness in Batgirl as well. Even though she's new to crime fighting, she's already demonstrating a sharp mind and a knack for thinking outside the box.
For sure. Think about how she figures out the Cobra Gang's hideout. It's not through brute force or lucky guesses. She pieces together clues, analyzes patterns, and uses her deductive reasoning to crack the case.
It's a great example of how Batgirl is already proving herself to be a worthy successor to Batwoman, and potentially even Batman himself. She's not just a sidekick, she's a capable hero in her own right.
And speaking of legacy, this whole issue really makes you think about the ripple effects of inspiration and mentorship. We see it with Blue Bowman being inspired by Bullseye, which raises questions about the cyclical nature of villainy. But then we see it in a more positive light with Batgirl being inspired by Batwoman and proving herself as a capable hero.
It's like this issue is showing us both sides of the coin when it comes to influence and legacy. Our actions, both good and bad, can have unintended consequences. And it's up to each individual to decide what kind of impact they want to have on the world.
That's such a powerful message, and it really resonates with me. It makes you think about your own role models and the people you look up to, and it also makes you consider the impact you might be having on others, even in small ways.
I agree. And it brings us back to this idea of mentorship, which is so central to this issue. We see Batwoman struggling with the responsibility of guiding her niece, and we see Batman and Robin offering their own perspectives on how to handle the situation.
It's a reminder that mentorship isn't always easy. And there's no one-size-fits-all approach. It requires careful consideration, open communication, and a willingness to adapt to the needs of the individual you're mentoring.
And sometimes it means letting go and trusting that the person you've mentored is capable of making their own choices and forging their own path.
You know what's interesting is that even though this issue was published back in 1961, these themes of mentorship, legacy, and the impact of our actions still feel incredibly relevant today. They're universal human experiences that we can all relate to, whether we're comic book fans or not.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that makes Batman #139 such a powerful and enduring story. It's not just about superheroes and villains, it's about the choices we make and the impact we have on the world around us.
I couldn't have said it better myself, Mary. And speaking of impact, we haven't even touched on the historical significance of this issue, particularly for comic book collectors. But before we get into that, let's take a moment to recap what we've discussed so far and highlight some of the key takeaways for our listeners. Welcome back to Little Monsters Comic Pop Deep Dive. We've been exploring Batman issue #139. And as we wrap up, it's clear this issue's legacy goes beyond just the story itself.
That's right, Justin. This issue isn't just a fun read, it's a piece of comic book history. And for collectors, that can mean serious value.
Absolutely. According to our source material, a high-grade copy of this issue featuring Batgirl's debut. Can be worth a couple of $1,000s today.
It makes you wonder if anyone listening might have one tucked away somewhere. But even beyond the monetary value, there's the historical significance. This issue marks a turning point for female representation in comics.
Right. Batgirl's arrival challenges the idea that crime fighting was just a boys' club. She's smart, capable, and in many ways, foreshadows the more complex and empowered female characters we see in comics today.
And it's not just about her being female, it's about her approach. She represents a different style of heroism, one that emphasizes intellect and strategy alongside physical prowess.
Exactly. She's not just a sidekick or a damsel in distress. She's an active participant in solving the mystery and bringing down the bad guys.
It makes you think about how Batgirl's debut paved the way for other iconic female heroes, both within the Batman universe and beyond.
Absolutely. And it all circles back to those themes of legacy and inspiration that we've been discussing. This issue isn't just a self-contained story. It's a stepping stone in the evolution of the Batman mythos and the broader world of comics.
And it reminds us that even fictional characters can have a lasting impact, inspiring new generations of creators and readers.
So if you're a Batman fan, a comic book enthusiast, or just someone who appreciates a good story with enduring themes, I highly recommend checking out Batman issue #139.
You might discover a hidden gem in your own collection, or you might simply find yourself captivated by a tale that continues to resonate decades after its publication.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Batman #139. Until next time, keep those bat signals shining bright.